Hey there YouTubers, this is Darth Caedus 22 and I'm coming at you with my 10th video and my 5th Versus series. While this is a relatively minor milestone, I decided to use it to make a Versus series between two of my all-time favorite characters from Star Wars. This is also a pairing that I have hoped to see in a Versus series before, and other people have requested it, so I decided to go ahead and do it myself. So yeah. So without further ado, I give you Darth Caedus versus Revan. Darth Caedus was born Jacen Solo 9 years after the Battle of Yavin to Han Solo and Leia Organa Solo on the planet Coruscant. Even from childbirth, along with his sister Jaina, he showed a strong presence and capability in the Force inherited from his grandfather, Anakin Skywalker. As a result, from even before they were born, both Jacen and Jaina were frequently the targets of people attempting to kidnap them, starting with Darth Caedus, who wanted to train them as his new Jedi, and by the reborn Emperor Palpatine, who tried to take both the twins and their newborn brother Anakin Solo. While Exar Kun assaulted the Jedi Praxium on Yavin 4, Jacen Solo, only a child at the time, took up his uncle's lightsaber and used it to defend his unconscious uncle against Sith spawn that had been sent by the ancient Sith Lord. After this incident, however, the Solo children were mostly left on Coruscant with Winter Selchu, who was an old friend of Leia's Organa Solo. In 22 ABY, Jacen and his sister Jaina went to the Jedi Praxium on Yavin 4 in order to study the way of the Jedi. During their time on Yavin 4, the twins made friends with Chewbacca son Lobaka, as well as with the Jedi Tenel Ka. During his time as a Jedi, Jacen fought against many enemies of the Jedi and the New Republic, including the Second Imperium, the Diversity Alliance, and the Black Sun. Jacen also became the apprentice of Luke Skywalker. However, the greatest threat to the galaxy had yet to come. In the year 25 ABY, the Yuuzhan Vong arrived in the known galaxy. The New Republic had been caught off guard by this new enemy, and as such, the Jedi assisted the military in the war. Jacen and his siblings took part in many of the early battles of the Yuuzhan Vong War, but the sheer brutality of the Yuuzhan Vong tactics left them scarred and damaged, both physically and mentally. It was also during this time that the New Republic was considering the use of Centerpoint Station, an ancient superweapon with great power that, if used right, could destroy an entire fleet. Jacen objected to this course of action, saying that it would destroy more than just the Yuuzhan Vong ships, and Anakin originally agreed with him, but their cousin Thraken Sao Solo forced the issue and used the Centerpoint Station himself. The result was devastating. While on one hand it destroyed a lot of Yuuzhan Vong ships, it also destroyed a good portion of the Republic fleet, just as Jacen had warned. Not long afterwards, Anakin was killed during the course of the war, and Jacen was captured by the Yuuzhan Vong, where he was placed in the Embrace of Pain, a religious artifact of the Yuuzhan Vong which subjected him to torturous amounts of pain and anguish. The pain he was subjected to in the Embrace of Pain was so great that it was believed by many of the members of the strike team that he had actually been killed by the Yuuzhan Vong. This was also where he ran into Vergere, a dark Jedi that had once served Emperor Palpatine. She tried to convince him that because of the Yuuzhan Vong's religion, which centered around pain and anguish, that the embrace of pain was less a torture tool and more a religious experience. Verger also started to convince him that the narrow-minded view of the Jedi might not be entirely correct, which would stick with him for years. At the end of the Yuuzhan Vong War, Jacen became one with the Force itself and used it to defeat Omni, which was the ultimate leader of the Yuuzhan Vong. In 30 ABY, Jacen set off on a pilgrimage to study under the other schools of Force thought. However, towards the end of his journey, when he ventured to Sinkhole Station where the Mind Drinkers were, he saw a vision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The vision he saw was of a dark man on a throne, with a young woman at his side that he instinctively knew was his own daughter. Jacen then returned to the Jedi Order in hopes of maybe stopping this vision from coming to pass. In 40 ABY, tensions between the Galactic Alliance and the Corellians began to rise even more than they had been in the past. When it was discovered that the Corellians were attempting to reactivate Centerpoint Station, Jacen was tasked with its destruction and the defeat, if possible, of Thraken Sal Solo. While Centerpoint was destroyed, Thraken Sal Solo managed to escape back to Corellia. It was not long after that he encountered Lumaya, the Dark Lady of the Sith who had once been an Emperor's hand, who had been in hiding for 20 years and was attempting to bring him to the dark side. She brought him to the ancient holdings of Darth Vectivus, using it as an example of a Sith Lord that was capable of following the dark side but still not being a major threat to the galaxy. He was then put in charge of the Galactic Alliance Guard, and along with Admiral Nathal, later staged a coup d'etat against the Commander-in-Chief of the Galactic Alliance, putting the two of them in command. However, his fall to the dark side was not complete until he had killed his aunt Mara Jade Skywalker. After this, he had sacrificed all family ties with the exception of his daughter Alana, and Lumaya had been killed, making him the new Dark Lord of the Sith. Naming himself Darth Caedus, he went about setting up his own Sith legacy and forming a new Galactic Alliance government. He later took on Tahiri Vela as his Sith apprentice after Ben Skywalker turned against him. He later carried out the firebombing of Kashyyyk with his ship, the Anakin Solo, in order to try and drive out his parents. Also, during the Battle of Fondor, he had his apprentice Tahiri kill Admiral Paleon, who was the commander of the Galactic Empire at the time. Darth Caedus finally met his end at the hands of his sister Jaina on board his ship, the Anakin Solo, as he was trying to get a warning to Tenel Ka that the Imperials were going to wipe out the Hapen royal family and his daughter Alana. However, before he died, he received one final vision, this time of Alana sitting upon the throne of balance and having members of many species around her. Darth Caedus died knowing that he had succeeded in his ultimate mission and that his daughter's future would be secure. Born in 3994 BBY on an unknown world in the Outer Rims territories. Discovered to be Force-sensitive from an early age, he was trained by many Jedi at the temple, including Jedi Master Kreia, who claimed to be his first teacher, although this was never actually confirmed. It was also during this time that he first met Alec, the future Darth Malak. When the Mandalorian Wars broke out, Revan and Alec went before the Jedi Council with a plea for the Jedi to intervene on behalf of the Republic. However, the Council ordered Revan and Alec, as well as any other Jedi, to not participate in the war, as they were still recovering from the war with Exar Kun. However, they went against the orders of the Jedi Council and rallied many Jedi to their cause and went to the front lines of the Mandalorian Wars. As the movement grew, this became known as the Revanchist movement, with Revan as its leader, the Revanchist himself. Revan's power and influence was so great that he basically was the public face of the Republic military during the war with the Mandalorians. During the battle with the Mandalorians on the Cathar homeworld, Revan gained a Mandalorian mask that had been discarded, which gave him his most iconic look. The Jedi Council eventually gave Revan and his movement their blessing reluctantly and unofficially, and they put him in command of the newly formed Mercy Corps, which worked closely with the Galactic Republic's military. A third of the Republic military was also placed under the command of Revan. The war finally came to an end at the Battle of Malachor V, where Revan faced off against Mandalore the Ultimate in single combat. After a prolonged fight between Revan and the leader of the Mandalorians, Revan emerged victorious over his opponent. But with his last words, Mandalore warned Revan of a greater threat, a powerful Sith Lord who had controlled Mandalore into starting the war with the Republic. The Sith Empire, thought long gone, had survived the end of the Great Hyperspace War. Revan and Malak traced the Mandalorians' route back through the unknown regions and into wild space, where they eventually came across the Sith Empire. It was at this point that they came face to face with the Sith Emperor himself, Darth Vitiate. But before they could defeat him, they were subdued and brainwashed by the Dark Lord of the Sith and became Sith Lords themselves under his influence. Named Darth Revan and Darth Malak, the two Sith Lords were sent into the greater galaxy to hunt down the location of the Starforge, an ancient Rakatan superweapon capable of creating great armies. However, as a twist, the influence of the Emperor started to wear off. However, they still continued their quest for the Starforge, only thinking that they were doing it to fight against the Sith Empire. At this point, Revan and Malak formed their new Sith Empire using the might of the Starforge, planning to wage their war against the Republic to prepare it for the eventual fight against the Sith Empire. Eventually, however, Revan was attacked by the Jedi under Bastila Shan, and then was betrayed by his Darth Malak, who attacked his flagship, and Revan was believed by many to have died in this attack. However, in a twist, Revan survived the battle and had his memories rewritten by the Jedi Council in an attempt to get him away from the dark side. He worked his way through his original path with Malak and uncovered the pieces of the star map, eventually leading him to the Starforge, where he finally faced off against Darth Malak for the final time. While Revan was victorious, his memory was beginning to return to him, including many of the details of what he had done as the Dark Lord of the Sith. However, some things still eluded him. He retraced his route back through the unknown regions, eventually winding up on the planet Nathema, where he was discovered by Darth Nihilus and Lord Scourge and brought back to Dromund Kaas. After spending several years in captivity, he was eventually rescued by Mitra Surik and Lord Scourge, and at that point he once again confronted the Sith Emperor. However, when they went to confront him, they were betrayed by Scourge, who had seen a vision of a great Jedi that would fight against the Emperor and win, and Revan was put into stasis for 300 years, which he used to manipulate the Emperor to an extent. He was later freed from imprisonment, and his eventual fate is not known, but it is possible he died at the hands of the Sith Empire. In the end, Revan was one of the greatest heroes of the Old Republic era, and his influence was still being felt 300 years after his believed death. Darth Caedus was a human male in his early 30s at the time of his death. As a result of his extensive training, Caedus was incredibly strong in terms of physical abilities, and he needed to be, having practiced multiple forms of lightsaber combat styles, including the more aggressive ones that required power strikes. His speed was also incredibly advanced, and he was able to use this to an advantage, even being able to stalemate Luke Skywalker on board the Anakin Solo. His endurance was incredible, being able to survive powerful hits and a prolonged duel, as well as his tolerance for pain as a result of his time spent in the embrace of pain. All in all, in terms of raw physical ability, Darth Caedus was no slouch. Revan was a human male in his 40s or 50s at the time of the death of Darth Malak. After that, his age gets a little weird. Technically, he is over 300 years old at the time of Star Wars The Old Republic, but because he was in stasis, I will still be considering him in his 40s at the time. Revan was incredibly strong in terms of speed and strength. He was able to break through his opponent's defenses with very few issues, and was able to block strikes much faster, mostly after his technique became more refined than during his earlier days. His durability was also extremely skilled, but he did have his weaknesses in that sometimes his defenses could be broken through, and he had some weaknesses against force attacks, but that's to be considered later. All in all, Revan was an accomplished fighter and was incredibly skilled in terms of physical attributes. Now, in terms of physical ability, there's actually very little to differentiate between these two combatants. They are both human males in the prime of their life, with extensive training by both Jedi and Sith, giving them incredible skill in terms of physical ability. So I kind of have the same problem going way back to my first Versus series of Aayla Secura versus Darth Talon, in that these two combatants have almost exactly identical traits. As such, I declare them equals in terms of physical ability. Darth Caedus was an absolute master in terms of lightsaber dueling. He was more than capable of fighting multiple opponents and was able to outfight Kyle Katarn, who was the Jedi Battle Master, as well as managing to fight Luke Skywalker to a stalemate. It can be inferred that he likely studied all 7 forms of lightsaber combat, similar to how he studied many different abilities in the Force, but I think I can narrow down his particular style. Form 1 Shicho is the simplest form of lightsaber combat, focusing mostly on blaster deflection and fighting multiple opponents. Caedus was capable of fighting off multiple Jedi at one time and had extreme skill in blast deflection, which implies a mastery of this style, but this is fairly standard for Jedi, so that was kind of a given. Also, given the fact that he's regarded as a master duelist, it wouldn't surprise me if he had training in Form 2 Makashi, the lightsaber combat form most geared towards dueling. This form was capable of fighting off opponents using flourishes and sweeps in order to protect the user. This is mostly conjecture on my part, but I believe that it is possible that Caedus, given the fact that he is a master duelist, was practiced in this form. For his defensive capabilities, Caedus likely augmented his already practiced hand at Shicho with Form 3 Sorisu, a defensive form of lightsaber combat. Caedus used it to block incoming lightsabers as well as blast deflection in order to counter an opponent's moves. Finally, I am of the opinion that his primary lightsaber combat form, however, was Form 5 Xian/Djimso with a heavy focus on Djimso. I believe that this comes from his training under Luke Skywalker, who was a practitioner of Djimso himself, and Caedus was a practiced hand at being able to counter an opponent's strikes and then move in quickly to retaliate, a common use of Form 5. In the end, Darth Caedus had won his title of being one of the greatest lightsaber duelists of his era. That's not to say he was undefeatable. He was eventually defeated, but at the time he was wounded and he was distracted because he was trying to get to Tenel Ka so that he could warn her about the threat to herself and Alana. At the height of his ability, Caedus was more than capable of fighting against the best of any era. Studying Revan's lightsaber combat technique, I pretty much have to agree with fellow Versus Series video maker Wolf Myth on this one. Revan was a skilled duelist, and he was capable of using force augmentation that strengthened him, as well as being able to counter opponents skillfully. He probably focused primarily on Ataru, and he was capable of combining acrobatics with strong kicks and punches, as it is regarded as being able to use all parts of the body in terms of combat. That being said, Ataru has its weaknesses. It can tire out a user easily and has to be augmented with other lightsaber forms. And in the case of Revan, it comes down to Form 5 Xian/Djimso, which he used in order to get an advantage over an opponent by breaking through their defenses and countering their attacks. And while originally this was more unrefined, by the point of this battle, I believe that Revan would become much more refined and much more skilled in Djimso, and would be able to use it much more effectively. And on top of that, he was also capable of using Xian, which he demonstrated on several occasions by using the reverse hand grip common to Xian users. He could use this to deflect blaster bolts and even fight against opponents with a lightsaber to great effect, making him an even more dangerous opponent. In the end, Revan was a skilled duelist. He was capable of strong offensive attacks, and once he was more refined, he was capable of defensive, but not to the degree of some of his contemporaries or later Jedi or Sith. All in all, he was a decent lightsaber duelist, and I would not discount his ability in this category. Now this is where things get a bit more interesting. While both combatants are arguably the greatest duelists of their respective eras, there is a distinct difference between the two of them. Namely that while Revan has a strong offense, Caedus has a strong defense as well as a strong offense, which in the end actually gives him more of an advantage than Revan does. As such, I give the advantage in terms of lightsaber dueling to Darth Caedus. Now this is where it starts to get a little bit more complicated for Darth Caedus. He was a practiced hand at many standard Force abilities and was incredibly skilled at them, including telepathy, which he was able to use in order to influence even the most strong-willed of individuals. His telekinetic powers were also incredibly skilled, even from a young age when he was using it at the age of 2 to basically cause mischief and play pranks, but he was much more refined later in life. At one point, he was even able to create a whirlwind of telekinesis, sending debris at his opponent. He could also communicate with animals using an advanced version of beast mastery, which served him well throughout his life. However, it became more strained during the Yuuzhan Vong War. There was very few limits to what he could do. He was even capable of using Tuda Menace to great effect later in life, absorbing blaster bolts and other attacks. He also was capable of using Shatterpoint, which made him even more dangerous, as he was able to use it to break through Beskar, which is possibly the most indestructible metal in the Star Wars universe. He was also skilled with Force Lightning and Force Choke after he fell to the dark side, and used them both to great effect in combat. And then we have his more esoteric abilities, the ones that he uses that are not standard to a Sith or a Jedi, that he learned from other Force schools. Jadar Ro of the Ang-Ti, for example, taught him flow walking, which allowed him to see into the future or to gaze into the past at will. At this time, he also learned Fighting Sight, which allowed him to predict the moves of his opponent in advance and gave him a strong skill in terms of combat abilities. From the Witches of Dathomir, he learned the ability to create an orb of light to provide illumination, as well as from the Night Sisters, he learned the ability of Blood Trail, which would allow him to track an opponent as long as they have been stained with his blood across many miles, even light years. He could also provide a shock to the spinal cord, paralyzing an opponent briefly, which gave him a sort of a variety of Force stun, but not in the traditional sense. He was able to listen in on distant conversations, as he learned from the Theron listeners, and also was capable of manipulating his own body's electromagnetic field and predicting the weather, as learned from the Baron sages. He could even use the ability of Memory Rub, which would affect the memory of an opponent and wipe parts of their memory, as well as the ability to create powerful illusions. In the end, Darth Caedus was an extremely accomplished Force user, having many Force abilities at his disposal that would be difficult to combat. This was partially because of his heritage, but it's also partially because of his own learned ability, which makes him a dangerous opponent in any fight. In terms of raw Force ability, Revan was an absolute master. He was one of the rare individuals, either Jedi or Sith, that was capable of using both light and dark side abilities at the height of his power. His ability in telekinesis was absolutely a powerhouse. He was capable of sending objects and his opponent flying when they were considerably larger than him, and he was capable of bringing down large objects with force of will alone. His mental capabilities were so strong that he was able to partially free himself from the will of the Sith Emperor, who was considerably stronger in terms of mental ability. And he was strong enough to impose his will on others and even influence the Sith Emperor for 300 years, during which he prevented him from invading the Republic. His ability in Force Sense was so capable that he could sense the feelings and emotions of his opponent and other beings, as well as being able to see into the future to great effect. For that, his ability in Force Lightning was extremely powerful, and he was even capable of using to the menace to even more great effect than a traditional practitioner, especially when he used it to redirect Darth Nihilus' Force Storm and hit her with it, basically turning her into ash. All in all, Revan, while he lacked the sort of natural ability that Caedus had, was an extremely accomplished Force user. Okay, this is where we get kind of interesting. You'd actually think that because Caedus has more of a variety at his disposal, he would have the advantage, but that is actually not the case. Yes, Caedus has more Force abilities, but these abilities for the most part don't have a combat application. His telekinetic attacks were strong, and he was a practiced hand at Force Lightning and telepathic attacks, but when actually compared to Revan, even with the augmentation of being able to anticipate moves, Revan actually outmatches him in this category. Especially when you consider the fact that Revan could draw on the Force itself, not limiting himself to either light or dark. In this category, I believe that there is no real contest. Revan gains the advantage in terms of Force abilities. Darth Caedus had his standard lightsaber throughout his career as a Jedi and a Sith. While it originally had a blue crystal, at the point when he constructed it after naming himself Darth Caedus, it replaced the blue crystal with a red synthetic crystal. All in all, there really wasn't much else to say about it. He pretty much just had a standard lightsaber. Revan had a fairly standard lightsaber of his era that had a purple lightsaber crystal that he used as its focusing lens. Although other than its color, it really was a standard lightsaber, and there's really not much else to say about it either. And this is where we get to a common recurring problem with these Versus series. In terms of what lightsaber, these two are pretty much identical. But instead of declaring them equals, I am going to make an interesting call. I am going to make this decision based off of their lightsaber crystals. The red lightsaber crystal, while synthetic, actually gives Caedus an advantage because it amplifies dark side abilities and gives him the advantage of creating a stronger blade. So on this, Darth Caedus gains the advantage in terms of lightsaber equipment. However, this will probably be negligible at best. And now for the moment you've all been waiting for, the verdict. Let me set the stage for this fight. As a location, I will set it aboard the Maelstrom prison, assuming that instead of having been freed, Revan remained in stasis aboard the prison. Caedus will have arrived on the station looking for technology and knowledge that the Empire had left behind, and fought his way through the droids that were still maintaining the prison. However, in the depths of the prison, he found something he did not expect. He had found Revan himself still in stasis after over 3,000 years. Deactivating the stasis, Caedus freed Revan, hoping to gain any knowledge that he might be able to provide. However, Revan, still recovering from the 3,000 years of stasis, recognizes the dark aura coming from his savior. Calling his lightsaber from its nearby location, he ignites it, and the battle between the Sith Lord and ancient Jedi is begun. Caedus is caught off guard by this attack, but manages to counter and block Revan's strikes each time at the beginning. And as Revan's delirious state begins to fade, he is able to strike Caedus with stronger power strikes. While Caedus is able to see them, he is not able to block all the strikes as Revan hits faster and stronger each time. Caedus finally resorts to hitting him with Force Lightning, but Revan catches it in the palm of his hand like he did against Darth Caedus, and sending it coursing through his body, he blasts it right back at Caedus, sending the Sith Lord flying. Revan raises his lightsaber above his head, preparing to strike down Caedus, who is dazed from the blast of Force Lightning. But at this time he is struck with a vision, this time the same vision that Caedus had received years ago of Darth Caedus sitting upon the galactic throne with Alana at his side. Revan deactivates his lightsaber, knowing instinctively that Caedus was the only one capable of stopping this future from happening. And instead of killing Caedus, he boards the shuttle and leaves Maelstrom Prison for parts unknown. While Revan and Caedus would be more evenly matched than most combatants, I have no doubt that this is how this battle would go. Revan may not receive this vision as he did in this version, and so he might not spare Caedus' life, but this is the direction I decided to go in. So in the end, I declare Revan the champion of the Galactic Republic, the victor. Yeah, this is, as usual, only my opinion. If you disagree, you are free to do so, and I respect your opinion. This was kind of a hard call to make since I am a fan of both Caedus and Revan. They are both what I consider Jedi or Sith that are capable of seeing the Force beyond just the black and white picture this Jedi paint. Also, I want to announce that because I recently passed 100 subscribers, I'm going to have a little drawing in order to sort of be a reward for everyone. At some point this week, I'm going to assign each of my visible subscribers a number and run them through a random number generator to decide a victor, and the winner will be able to pick my next video, be it a versus series, a Legends of Star Wars, or anything really as long as it's Star Wars related. I will be deciding that in the next few days, and whoever wins, just pick something good, and well, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.